A group of teenage journalists from around the country are working to shed light on the issue of gun violence. Their project, called Since Parkland, tells the story of the 1,200 American kids killed by guns since the Parkland shooting 1 year ago today.
The teens work with the Miami Herald, McClatchy, and the nonprofit Newsroom Trace. We are joined now by Madison Hahamy, the senior project reporter for Since Parkland, and Amy Driscoll, the editor and senior projects reporter for the Miami Herald. Good to have you both. So, Madison, explain this Since Parkland project for our audience and why it was started.
So, Since Parkland was started after the shooting happened at Parkland, a lot of teenagers, myself included, felt as though we needed to be a part of the larger conversation concerning gun violence, because the message that was at least running through my head was it could have been me. I don't really feel safe in my schools anymore. And it wasn't enough to just sit by and let the adults take part in the conversation. We wanted to have a voice as well. And so being a journalist, a good way for us to have a voice is to use our words and the power of words to kind of get our message out there. So I was approached in the summer by Katina, who is my senior editor. She is working on the project. She asked if we would be interested in writing about gun violence. And I had known nothing else about the project at the time, but I started to work on it because I felt not only that I wasn't really safe in my schools, and I wanted to be able to try and mitigate that problem with my own voice, but also that I lived in the suburb of Chicago, and I felt very separated and isolated from the city, but I knew that there was a lot of gun violence that went on, and I wanted to be more connected to my community and learn more about the pervasive problem that was happening there. And through the project, once we started working on it, and I started learning about all of the children that have been killed through gun violence, I think that for me, the project kind of changed to be more about just trying to humanize the victims, because we see on TV, we see like numbers and we see names, but we don't always know their stories. And I also learned that there's a lot of people who have been killed by gun violence whose stories aren't even told on the news. Kids who are riding their bicycles, kids who were shot in their homes, kids who were just, going out to a restaurant to eat, and we don't hear their stories. But there's thousands of them, and there's a couple every single day who were alive today who won't be alive tomorrow because of a gun. And I think that this story, just being able to share those kids whose stories would not have been told otherwise, that's why it's really important to me and why I think it's really important to the world.
Yeah, Amy, to what Madison just said, I think, shortly after the shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, part of the conversation was, yes, this mass shooting was horrific, but across the country, there are young people who are living with the threat of gun violence on a daily basis, and they should also be part of this conversation. What they're sort of experiencing should be part of this conversation. Amy, I want to talk about your reporting. What did your reporting reveal about gun violence since the shooting a year ago?
Well, we embarked on this journey to look at all of the cases of gun violence against children 18 and under in this country, but also particularly in Florida, which is where I am, which is also where Parkland happened. And we started out sort of kind of like what Madison said as well, thinking that we could maybe at least have other voices in the news that maybe are not always in the news. And then along the way, we realized that, the parents really, for them, the pain doesn't change no matter if it's a month ago, a year ago, or a decade ago, because we did talk to some parents from a long time ago who lost children. So to talk about their cases, to see if they are finding any kind of justice in the criminal justice system, to bring their cases to light, was important to them and important to us. And I think it's important to the national conversation as well. So that's really what we were trying to do with this project.
Yeah, and the question, I guess, is you really had a specific focus on the victims, and it's so important in this day and age. I know that in the news, we have to provide the facts of when these massacres and these school shootings happen, and so we give the name of the person who committed these horrific acts, but you really wanted to focus more on the victims.
That's true, and we learned a lot by talking with them. For one thing, they don't feel as though their stories are being fully told. Especially perhaps in the rougher neighborhoods, they don't feel as though they get the same amount of attention as people in wealthier places. And that's something for us all to think about, including those of us in the media. But there was also, there's more nuance to the whole situation than you might think. They're not all completely anti-gun. There are a lot of accidental shootings. There are a lot of domestic violence shootings. And I think that children are paying the price for this, and including them in the conversation and helping to shape the conversation nationally is really an important step for all of us. That's what this project was really about, to bring all of that into one place and let the victims have a moment to have their cases discussed as well.
Madison, what's been the reaction or the response to this project?
It has been incredibly overwhelming, but in an amazing way. I had really hoped that the project would generate intense coverage, because I know that what we're talking about is really important, and also that nothing on this scale has ever really been done before. But I mean, seeing our project on the New York Times, seeing senators and celebrities retweeting it, and seeing people commenting, I think the comments actually are probably one of my favorite parts, because you just see on a very human scale how the impact that this has had on people across the country, and actually across the world, because I know that we've been in some international places as well. And I just really hope that the impact continues, but I think that it will, because I think this is too important to just go away.
You know, Amy, I want to touch on something that you mentioned, because we were talking about this earlier. You said that you spoke to students across the country in various school districts, and it's been interesting, I think, for those of us in the media to see how much attention has been paid to the students of Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, and yet, you know, Madison, you're not in Florida, you're in Chicago or in Illinois, and I wonder what the reaction has been to children, for example, living in schools like in Chicago, where they deal with gun violence on an almost regular basis, and what they say about gun violence in their schools and how it differs from a school like Marjory Stoneman, which for the first time had this happen to them in their community even, right? And in Chicago or in some places across the country, gun violence is just a part of life.
Yeah, what I think is very interesting about this project is that though, you know, Marjory Stoneman and the shooting that happened there was about gun violence in that school that came into the school, really what you guys are talking about is that young people are exposed to gun violence as part of the fabric of their lives all across this country. It's not just happening in schools. You know, you mentioned, Amy, about domestic violence cases and accidental shootings. I mean, these guns are in our homes, and they're affecting our children.
Right. We spoke to a lot of parents who had different, and families who had different stories to tell us about things like a 7-year-old boy playing in the front yard of his mother's family home who was shot and killed in crossfire. It had nothing to do with him. Another boy who was in the back seat of a car less than a mile from home in daylight. Should have been fine, and it wasn't. He never came home. Things like that, where it's like you realize that these are situations that happen to everybody. We're all going out there, we're all doing these things, and yet you really don't feel safe, I think, in a lot of places. I think that's what the kids have been telling us. And for the parents, it's a shock, because many of them hadn't thought about guns or gun violence in particular about their children. They thought that was something that happened to other people, and they are stunned and horrified to find themselves in this situation. It's a very emotional situation, and there were a lot of tears and a lot of people hugging each other in these conversations that we've been having. But overall, I think they're very glad that we're focusing on it. The kids are paying the price for something that the adults are doing.
It's a fascinating project. 1,200 kids killed by guns in the year since Parkland. Madison Hahamy, Amy Driscoll, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And a quick programming note tonight, you can stream a CBS News special, 39 Days, about how Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School mobilized in the days following the shooting. That will stream tonight at 8 and 11 Eastern on CBSN and is available anytime on CBSNews.com.